Welcome to our winter wildflower virtual session that will be led by Don Drife. This session is being held to get you ready if you do plan on coming on Sunday out to our prairie to learn about what wildflowers do in the wintertime. So I'm Sally Petrella. I'm the president of the Friends of Rouge Park. We're an organization that has been around for over 20 years, working to bring back Detroit's largest, most natural and beautiful park located on the west side of the city. So we do a lot of programming, we do a lot of stewardship activity, and we do a whole lot of advocating to improve the park and get more people out there using it. So I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our very first executive director. This has been a long time in coming in that we have been a small community-led organization, and we still are a community-led organization, but the need for our work, the work of our organization has grown and grown. And last year we were finally able to raise enough funding to be able to hire Lindsay Pilock. And she is here with us tonight, so I'll let her say a word or two if she wants to do that.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here with all of you. I started on Monday as the executive director, and I am just thrilled to be working with the organization. So a little bit about me. I'm from Detroit's West Side in Rosedale Park, and went away to school at U of M, where I was in the School of Natural Resources there. And then for the last, I was in the Peace Corps in Paraguay, and then moved back to Detroit, and have been working with the Urban Agriculture Company for about 20 years. And now working with Friends of Rouge Park. And I feel like it's just a great fit for me. And I'm so excited to learn with and from all of you. And I'm a big fan of wildflowers. And so I am a humble student here tonight as well.
Great, thank you. I am getting a little bit of background noise, so if you are not a speaker, if you could please mute, or I am muting some of you. So without further ado, I would like to invite Don to begin the presentation. And he's done wonderful walks for us. He's kind of a self-taught botanist. And puts together just wonderful programs and talks. So go ahead, Don.
Yeah, so this has been a passion of mine for a while. I got Helen Smith's Winter Wildflowers book back in the 70s. And my botanical mentor told me that you don't know a plant unless you can identify it whenever it's up. So if you can't tell it by the seed pod, you don't know that plant, or by the bud or the flower or the leaf or whatever. And so I've never put together a program on this before. So this is fun. And why can't I advance slides? There we go. We have to plug a few things. 100 years of Rouge Park. That's kind of cool. And there's going to be a lot of events this year. I couldn't find a logo, Sally. So.
I'm sorry, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention that it's 100 years that as of 2025, Rouge Park has officially been open for 100 years. And we are going to be celebrating that all year, including a big celebration in June. So it's amazing that that park has been around for 100 years.
Yeah.
I also, while I'm up here talking, somebody did ask in the chat how long the walk would go, and we said from 2 to 3:30. If it's really cold, Don will actually go on until 4, as he does like to talk. So I think we'll try to keep until 3:30 because we don't want anybody to get frostbite or anything. But please, that is also a reminder to make sure to put on your long johns and your wool socks and your hats and your gloves to keep all those extremities warm. Back,
I was asked how long the walk would go, and I says if it's really cold, I will get it within Sally's 1 hour time frame. So, and then we've got Winterfest coming up later this month, which is
Yep.
another great time in the park, and we might actually have winter this year for it, which will be fun. So I am president of the Southeastern chapter of the Michigan Botanical Society. And the Botanical Society's walks and involvement in Rouge Park go back into 1941. So just before the start of World War II. This is an early group. This is probably from the 1950s. We're down there. I don't know if I showed a picture farther back, some of you would recommend the remains. You would recognize the remains of the picnic table that they're on. This is the concrete pylons that are in a couple of places in Rouge Park. And then the Botanical Society, we're going to the U of M Herbarium on February 15th. If you've never been to a haystack, it's a fascinating place, 1 million specimens plus. And then for at U of M Dearborn at the Environmental Interpretive Center on Sunday, the March 9th, we have a program on growing trees and shrubs from seed. Bill Schneider from Wild Type. So that should be a fun program. These are the two resources that I use. Winter Wildflowers by Helen Smith. It was a Michigan Botanical Club publication number 2. And the club no longer has copies. There are copies floating around on the secondhand market, and I think I'll have a couple there that you can have for a donation either to Friends of Rouge Park or the Botanical Society. And then Weeds in Winter by Brown. That's been in print for 40 years now, and you can still get that off of Amazon. So the Winter Wildflowers are photographs, and as much as I like photographs, sometimes line drawings are better. So the Weeds in Winter are beautiful pen and ink drawings, and they show the plants well. So either one of these will start you on your way. So when I look at a wildflower in winter, there's a few things I look at right away. The shape of the seed head. Is it a, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not.
yes, we can.
Barely.
Okay, I remember how to enable it. So is it like that's a round sphere? So that's a pod that really doesn't split open, and these split. These have exposed seeds. You know, the burrs, this flat top. Just what does this plant look like now? And so all of these, at least to me, are pretty distinctive. And we'll talk about all of them in the talk. The leaf arrangement, is it alternate, one leaf per node, or opposite, 2 leaves, or whorled, 3 or more? You can tell that in the winter. Sometimes it's just the leaf scar that's left. But you can usually tell if they're opposite or alternate, which gives you a good hint. On some plants, there are petal scars. So there are vascular bundle scars here that fed fluids out to the petals. So you can see where the petals attached to the plant and whether it was above the ovary or below the ovary. And now with global warming, the winter rosettes are visible almost year-round. It's seldom that I can't find the rosettes, at least in southern Michigan, that the snow is heavy enough. So these rosettes have, in the last 10 years, for me, become an important character. So we have the crinkly leaves of the teasel. So most of these are biennials. So these three are biennials.
It's Christmas bigger now.
So they come up from seed to this point, and then next year they'll flower from these plants. These three are perennials. This is birdfoot violet that now overwinters as a rosette. Motherwort with this crinkly leaf that looks like a gooseberry. That's in the mint family. That's largely perennial. It's a short-lived perennial. And then our friend garlic mustard with that crinkly leaf. That is, in the literature, it's a biennial, but it sure doesn't behave that way in southern Michigan. So these rosettes are important characters, and you can learn them during the growing season. So you can learn what that rosette looks like when the plant is coming into flower, or find next year's next to it and figure out what it is. So we're going to go through some of my favorite plants for winter, some of the easier ones to learn, and also some that we'll probably see in the prairie. Velvet leaf has a neat looking pod. It's kind of got that zigzagged stem. The pods are beaked. They're hairy. They're arranged in that circle. They're kind of flat topped. And the pods actually are more attractive than the flowers. The flowers are pretty small. But that is an easy one to learn. So it's maybe a foot tall, usually in a disturbed area. Our friends, the milkweeds. So normally I'm happy in the winter if I can get a plant to a genus. So if I know it's a milkweed, sometimes I can go further, but usually that makes me happy with the milkweed and the fact that some of us are gathering them for seed off of country roads. We like to know what they are. So milkweed has a pod that's split, revealing these flatted seeds. Swamp milkweed has a narrow, upright pod and has opposite leaves, and you can see the leaf scars. Butterfly weed also has narrow, upright pods, but if you can't tell, the branching is different, and it's a little hard to describe. If you can't tell the branching, you can look at the leaf scars, and they're alternate. That's our only alternate milkweed. And then common milkweed has this warty pod, kind of a wide pod. What did I do? That tapers back to a point. And the milkweeds will hold their seeds for a good part of the winter. You can usually find seeds on the milkweed. Turtlehead. So the other thing I look at when I get a seed pod is how many parts are the capsules. So this, I think the seed pod resembles a turtlehead, not quite as much as the flower of the plant. It's a two-parted capsule. Not many of our plants have two-parted capsules. And it has that real dense raceme, short-stalked flowers in a tight, real tight cluster. So that's maybe a foot tall, usually likes to grow in a wetter area. Wild yam we should see down on the edge of the prairie. It's a twining vine. It's more noticeable in the winter than it is when it's flowering. So it has that three-winged fruit. The fruit are 3/4 of an inch or an inch long. And it's quite apparent up in the tree. And like I said, this is along the edges of the prairie that we're visiting. Wild cucumber. It's a climbing vine, climbs with tendrils, these long spiral growths. Has an inflated pod, spiny, a very papery pod. And this is an annual. So it has to produce seeds every year to maintain the population. And this is also on the edge of the prairie. And sometimes by spring, these have disappeared. They're pretty fragile, but I've seen a few lately, so I hope we'll be able to find that down at Rouge Park. Swamp mallow. It's another one that likes wet areas. It's maybe 3 feet tall. You'll often be standing on ice in the winter when you're looking at this plant. Has open seed pods that point up. They're hairy inside. The bracts around the flowers are covered with fine scales. And that's one I don't think we have at Rouge Park.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I haven't seen that one. It's more common along the Lake Erie, the marsh areas along the lake. Common St. John's wort is in the prairie. It's opposite branched, and the pods are 3-parted. Has those upright pods that split partway open. That is in the prairie. But it's actually a pretty little plant when you look at it close up with the details. This is Michigan lily. We have that along the Sorrison. I'm sorry, I have to learn the new name of that. The Meiningen Trail?
Myingen Wildwood Trail.
My England. Okay, thank you.
Myingen. It means wolf.
My England. Yeah. But I don't know of any in the prairie, though it actually should be there. And that has, you can see where the petals attached to it. Has a 3-parted pod with the petal attachments right below it. And so I didn't put in a iris, but the iris looks similar, but it lacks those scars for the petals. The various orchids, the moccasin flower or stemless lady slipper. The lady slippers persist into winter, and sometimes you'll even find the seed pods with flowering plants. You'll find the previous year's seed pod. And to me, they look like orchid pods. All orchids have that same shape. There's usually a remains of the lip, which can help identify them. This is the European helleborine that's been imported into Michigan and is now everywhere. It's probably our most common orchid now. Those alternate broad leaves that just clasp at the base. And then that orchid-shaped pod, and you can usually make out the lip if you break one of these off and examine it. Helleborine loses its seeds pretty early in the winter, sometimes just in the late fall, so these are hollow. A few of our other native orchids tend to retain the seeds, like purple fringed orchid, and they'll dihyst them during the winter.
So I have seen helleborine in Rouge Park, although in the forest, not in the prairie. We also have ladies' tresses orchids in the prairie, but I don't think that they would persist. They usually come out in the fall. Do you think that we would see those out in the prairie?
The problem with finding those seeds is they're pretty nondescript and they're in the other vegetation, usually. I have seen them in the winter.
Okay, yeah, they're very small.
Yeah, they're very small, but they're usually something usually falls on top of it. So they're usually buried. And where I've seen them have been places where I know within a few feet of where the plant is. They're very hard to find. Evening primrose we'll find there. This has a four-parted pod that points upright. It's arranged on a very slender spike, and they're 5-6 feet tall. The burn in the prairie produced some nice ones of these. Normally it has fine hairs, and if you notice that I'm saying things like most of the time and normally, hairs can wear off by this time of year. So plants that I would expect to have hair, sometimes you can't find any. And if you look at them under a hand lens, you can sometimes see the base of the hairs are still there. But this is absolutely distinctive as a four-parted pod. Moth mullein, I don't think we have any in the prairie, which is not a bad thing. It's in a couple of the more weedy roadside areas in the park. Has a spherical bead-like pod, a very round pod. Normally it has its little tip, curled tip. They point upwards and they split very late in the year. So it's a very slender plant. And it's one of the winter rosettes. So that's next year's flowering plant. Common mullein, that thick, that unbranched stalk. Often the dried leaves persist on it into the winter. It's a biennial, so that's the next year's rosette. So it's kind of going dormant for the winter. This was up in Grayling in March. I think I took that picture. And then it'll green back up and start growing. So it's a very stout plant. So that makes it pretty easy to tell in the winter. There isn't much that we have that's like that. Blue vervain, we have that in the prairie. It's clusters of very slender terminal spikes. The plants can be 5 feet tall. Has these fine little seed pods. Usually get 5 seeds per pod for you who like trivia. But that real narrow, long and narrow spike is pretty distinctive for a vervain. Thimbleweed has a branch stem. It's maybe a foot tall. Has a puffy thimble-like seed head. And now I'm finding out that people don't know what thimbles are. But we saw this out on the Scout Hollow had some of these. And people were asking me if they were cotton. And I can kind of understand that. With that cotton, those cottony tufts, and the seeds are visible. I didn't do too many woody plants, but this one is along the edge of the prairie, so I put it in. It's Virgin's Bower. Each seed has a feathery tail on it. It's a very dense seed cluster, and it's a trailing vine, and it trails up trees or over the vegetation. And I think we'll be able to find this down in the prairie. But it is a true clematis. It's a gorgeous little white flower when it blooms in the summer. And you can see the remains of the leaf there, of a compound leaf. So if you don't know a plant, what a plant is, look it over well and see what leaves you can find that are still attached. Don't get confused by a leaf that has fallen into the plant. And look at what leaves are there and the growth habit and the habitat. And all these things help us identify them. Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot. That's another imported plant that's pretty distinctive in the winter. The plants are about a foot tall. They'll hang on to these flat, spiny seeds for most of the winter. The umbels are distinct, and even after it loses the seeds, they'll have these bristles at the base of the umbel, or you can see the remains of the bristles. So if you look right there with a hand lens, you can tell that it was bristled. They do come off often by spring. Teasel, we have a couple of species in Michigan. The heads are identical on them. So they have these long bracts at the base of the head, and then the head has the long spikes at the tip. It's this oblong head that's spiny, and there are spines along the stem. The two species we have are told apart by the leaves, so sometimes you can identify the species by the remains of the leaf. One has a perfoliate leaf that's pretty simple, and the other one is a dissected leaf. I can't tell the basal rosettes apart. I've looked at the basal rosettes and they don't seem to have the cut leaves on that species. But this is another one that's a biennial. And so I just visited a colony today, and it had about 50 rosettes and no seed heads. So next year it'll have seed heads. So it's on an every other year flowering schedule because it's a biennial. So I've never seen it's the only colony I know of that that is exclusively one or the other. Some of them cycle. So some colonies I know have more flowers one year than the next, but I've never seen one. And that's been 8 years I've been watching that one. It's one of the nature parks in Royal Oak. And we haven't managed to get a seed to hang on for another year to get out of cycle. Curly dock, those reddish brown fruits, that three-winged surrounding a single seed, are pretty distinctive, that shape of that wing, and those fine seeds that hang down. That we should see in the prairie. Round-headed bush clover. It's another one that's, I think, is pretty distinctive. It's hard to describe. Dense fruiting heads on upright, short-stalked, relatively short-stalked. Most plants are unbranched, except for some of the big ones. You'll get some branching, but you get a lot of unbranched secondary stalks. But I think that's a pretty distinctive plant. There's some variations. Some are a lot more spherical, some are oblong. But I think these are all round-headed bush clover. I saw both of these plants in flower, so that always helps in identifying them. Common mountain mint. So mints have the square stem. You can see the square stem in the winter. This fruiting cluster is common in a lot of the mints. The way that looks. This tends to be more gray. And if you have any doubt about this species, you can just brush your hand against the seed heads and you'll pick up the aroma of this mint. This is a prairie plant. We do have it at the prairie in Rouge Park. So hopefully we'll find it. You can see the real fine leaves. But later in the year, especially after a few heavy snows, those leaves get stripped off. And you just have these grayish heads. And yeah, I like it. It's one of my favorite plants. Wild senna. This is one that we see more because of wild plantings. I haven't seen much in Michigan that I thought were wild populations. It has a bean-like fruit. The pods are maybe 2 inches long, and they split in two from the tip. So this one is starting to lose its seeds, and I think it's quite attractive in the winter. I have it in my yard, and I leave it up all winter, and sometimes before the seeds split, the goldfinches will come and get them. Purple coneflower. The heads are an inch or inch and a half in diameter and about as long. So it has these scales. The scales are separated from each other. There's gaps in between them. Has rough opposite leaves. It looks a lot like a black-eyed Susan. But a black-eyed Susan, the plant, the flower head tapers more, and the bracts right under the heads persist. These are the bracts. A few of these are actually ray flowers that I've hung on this one. But it's more of a gray than this reddish brown of the purple coneflower. And again, the purple coneflower is one that we see in wildlife plantings. It's debatable as to whether or not it's actually a native. Common burdock. So these spherical clusters of burrs along the stem. They're way too familiar to us people who hike in the winter and people who walk dogs in fields in the winter. They readily detach, and they can be carried along. That's how they disperse. This is another biennial. It's not a native, and I think we've gotten rid of it at the prairie. I think the burn took it out. So this is one I'm hoping we won't find down there on Sunday. Bull thistle, spiny stem and heads. The heads can nod or point upwards, but they have the spines right at the base of the seeds, and then the spines all the way up and down the stem. Swamp thistle looks a lot like this, but the heads are smaller and they don't have the spines. Swamp thistle is a little nicer thistle to come in contact with. And then finally, Joe Pye weed. We'll see not this species, we'll see its cousin in the prairie, I hope. There were some gorgeous ones down there last fall that were 10 feet, 12 feet tall. So you can recognize Joe Pye weed. The leaves are whorled. These are the seeds. It's whitish seed, but even without the seeds, it's got a flat top. It's not a true umbel. The branches come from different points. And those whorled leaves, that tells you it's one of the Joe Pye weeds. This one in Michigan, this is spotted Joe Pye weed, has 4 leaves per whorled. The one we have at Rouge Park is the sweet Joe Pye weed, and it's 6 to 8 leaves per whorl. And like I said, the ones we have down there are impressive plants. Any any plant that I can't reach the flower on is impressive. Well, that's my introduction to just this. We could look at another 100 species or so, but I didn't want to overwhelm people too much. And I don't know if we have questions, or I hate to ask for comments, but
Don, this is fantastic. I am just fascinated by your photographs, these close-ups of these plants. It's just amazing. Like some of these look pretty boring when you're out there, but these photos like really show the detail, and I'm looking forward to actually seeing these in person. I know we'll find that giant Joe Pye weed that's taller than you. It's gonna be out there for sure.
oh, no, I've learned never say for sure.
Well, this is true. I mean, I suppose it could have been knocked down, and also, they're predicting. It looks like we're gonna maybe get an inch and a half of snow tomorrow, but who knows? So do other people have questions? It looks like maybe there is a question at the chat. Somebody's commenting, saying gorgeous photos. Other questions or comments? You can put it in the chat. I think I muted everybody. I think you can unmute yourself, but you can also put it in the chat if you can't figure that out, but feel free to comment. I know Don would love to hear your questions or comments. Susan says, great talk. I totally agree.
Which ones are invasive? I avoided the invasives pretty much. The garlic mustard is. So things like burdock can be troublesome, but it's a biennial. If you attack it, you can usually control it. But I avoided the true invasives. We're actually working on a booklet on invasive Michigan plants in the winter, so we can get out and do more survey work in the winter. It's a great time to get into a marsh when they're frozen, if they freeze. But so you can walk in with a marsh without doing any damage if everything's frozen. The walk Saturday will be no more than an hour and a half. If it's cold, it will be an hour.
Looks like you've got some great comments here. And somebody now wants you to put the flower in bloom. And so I guess that's your next task.
I've done that in the past, and it's just too much to have on the screen. So you come to the summer walks, and we'll teach you all of these in the summer then.
Somebody's asking about, you mentioned at the start that garlic mustard doesn't behave as a biennial in Southeast Michigan. I kind of agreed with this person here. Can you explain that?
We have plants marked at Tenhave Woods, and they will persist for several years as long as they don't fruit.
So do they not flower?
Yeah, they won't. Yeah, as long as they don't flower. So if we're doing something to them, like cutting them down, they'll persist. And then in the Arboretum, we had one that was by a water source, and it flowered and survived. It flowered 2 years in a row. And a lot of the biennials will do that.
Wow.
In a garden situation. So
That's
yeah, you
very
just
unusual.
can't cut the flower heads off and hope that the plants die. If you cut in a dense area, we've weed whacked the plants down, taken the leaves off and the flowers. You have to carry them out. If you leave anything that's close to flower on the ground, it'll set viable seed. So you've got to carry it out. But we've controlled it that way too.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that we've been fighting garlic mustard. We don't get it in the prairie. It's only
Yeah,
a woods plant, but honestly, we've pretty much wiped it out in the park.
you've done a great job down there.
Last year, we were actually looking for some because we wanted to package it up to so people could make garlic mustard pesto out of it. And there was only one spot in the park where we could come up with much of it.
That's over 20 years of volunteer work days on it.
Yeah.
You've got a few more questions here. Great photos. Thanks for all this information. Wish I could remember it all. So I enjoy looking at garden plants, but I'm not that great. So this is very helpful. Some I've never noticed before. And then this question, which of these plants provide the most food/seed for birds in the winter?
Out of the ones I've showed, or I have an area by the house here, and we have cup plant, which I didn't put in the talk. We have cup plant, we have purple coneflower, we have the prairie coneflower, and the wild senna. And the birds come at that at different times of the year. They will feed on the Joe Pye weed, but you don't get a lot of seeds for the size of the plant. And a lot of these, like garlic mustard, birds will feed on the seeds, unfortunately, and move them around.
Mm-hmm. Mentioned walk was Saturday, but it is Sunday. Yes, correct. The walk is
Sunday.
Sunday at 2:00 at the north entrance. So the prairie, there's a sign that says Prairie Pathway and Butterfly Garden right on Outer Drive, just a little bit south of Joy Road, which Outer Drive goes over. So it gets kind of confusing. Somebody also has a question here. What about asters? I think she's asking about asters in terms of good seeds for birds, or will we see them? I know we have a bunch out there.
Yeah, I avoided asters in the talk. I didn't put in goldenrods in the talk. We will see them. Yeah, asters and goldenrod, especially early in the winter, are important seeds for wildlife. But they tend to disappear. So a lot of the heads on the goldenrods will be down, especially if we get 1.5 inches of snow. So the asters and the goldenrods, and it is possible to tell some of the aster species in the winter. My ability to tell plants in the winter is in direct proportion to my knowledge of them in the growing season. So plants that I'm very familiar with, it's a little easier to identify them to species.
Angela is asking, is there a general rule around seed collecting in Rouge Park or in any area? That's a good question. Yeah.
That's a Detroit park. So the general rule is I need written permission to collect in the city park. And then it's figuring out who can give you written permission. So you used to be able to get a general permit for state land in Michigan from the DNR. Now you have to get it from each manager in the area, as far as I know. So if I want to go and collect, if I find a plant and I want to go and collect it, I need the permission of the park manager at Belle Isle or at Hartwick Pines before I can take specimens. And I think seed collecting in the Detroit parks is the same way, though I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, we can look into that a little bit more. We actually have done some seed collection in the prairie. Now, that being said, the prairie was planted. Most of the plants there were placed there, but we can look into it.
So the question of gathering seed, like at Hartwick Pines, was picking blueberries, gathering seed. That's the gray area.
Mhm. Mhm.
So where does that stop? And of course, if it's a threatened or endangered species, there's a whole nother
Yeah,
glare.
yeah.
Last week I just found a mosquito fern. It's an aquatic fern, a zola, in a pond at the Detroit Zoo. And so I wanted to take a specimen because I think there's only 4. I think that's the 4th state record for this thing.
Wow. And it just showed up at the zoo.
Yeah, it's in this pond at the zoo, and they haven't put animals into it. It's the old turtle pond. If anybody
Wow.
wants to go see a zola, it's between the wolves and the kangaroos.
Right.
And I got permission from park safety to climb the fence, and I'm not sure who else gave me permission to actually take the fern. And it took me approximately 20 minutes to get approval, which I couldn't believe.
Interesting. Well, somebody's pointing out with your blueberry example, the evidence of your having taken them disappears pretty quickly.
When was the prairie planted?
The prairie was planted in 1999. It was a Rouge grant, and Esther Dernwald from Michigan Wildflower Farm was the contractor. So she did herbiciding and then she put down the seed. So quite a few years.
It's one of the more natural looking prairie plantings that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I know it took many years because I that's when I first got involved in Rouge Park was then because I had been doing some work in prairies, and they called me out there because they planted it, and then they wanted me to tell them what was coming up, which is a lot more difficult than you might think because these things weren't blooming; they were just little green plants, and they didn't necessarily know which stuff was planted where, and it was huge 15 acres of that area. And, we did learn with prairies that it takes 4 or 5 years before they really establish themselves. And I know especially for the grasses, there's a lot of the tall prairie grasses more on the northern end of the prairie. And that took a really long time for that to get established. But it's doing pretty well now. So it looks like our questions are kind of wrapping up. So let me just see if there's any. When was the prairie last planted? Do we have any more questions? All right. Well, I just want to give a big thank you to Don. It's just so I love listening to him, and he's just great at helping us to understand this. And hopefully you all will be able to come out on Sunday and practice all these skills. He's going to quiz you and expect you to identify all these plants. And And he'll teach you more. And again, just a reminder, if you are coming out on Sunday, to make sure to wear some warm footwear and hats and gloves and long johns. I looked at the weather. It's going to be in the 20s, but with the wind chill, it'll be a little bit colder, and it is kind of open there on the prairie. So dress warm, and we will see you then. And just again, this program is supported by the Friends of Rouge Park. If you are not a member of the Friends of Rouge Park, we would love you to become a member. I think our membership chair, Paula, is on. It's only $5 for individual or $10 for a family. But help us help support the work to bring you these programs and to really bring back this park. So go to rougepark.org, and if you didn't register for the walk, you can register there. You can become a member. You can donate. You can get involved. So thank you again so much, Don. See you all on Sunday.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Be nice to see you. All righty. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.